I did a Megadeth review not too long ago, or at least I thought so. I looked and it was over a year ago already, which is so crazy. So I was pretty shocked when I got a text from my friend Chris asking if I was ready to see Megadeth again. I was like, I don't think I said I was going to Megadeth. He's like, yeah, you did like a month ago and I got you a ticket. So I was pleasantly surprised. I'm like, sure, I can't say no to seeing Megadeth, even though I was seeing Testament that same week, just a couple days afterwards. But I thought I can handle, two legendary metal bands in 1 week. What the hell? I looked it up and saw that Mudvayne and All That Remains were opening. And I got real excited because All That Remains is a band that's been around a long time. I used to have students who were real shredder students who would come in and ask me to learn some of their stuff so I could teach them. And one of my students brought in 2 weeks, and I thought that was an incredible solo. And he kind of challenged me to learn it, I think, or I challenged myself to learn it. And I was actually able to pull it off. And it was kind of a big deal for me because it was such a challenging solo at the time. So I knew I was going to look forward to seeing them, but I never really hit the Mudvayne train, if you will, back in the day. In 94, I got into Korn, and the nu metal thing kind of started up. I eventually got into Slipknot and other bands, but I never quite grabbed onto Mudvayne for some reason. But I remember loving the sound of his scream. I dug the song Dig. That's funny. I dug Dig. His singing voice always kind of hit me funny. Like, I always thought he sounded like the singer from Bare Naked Ladies. I don't know. Check it out. See what you think.
Look into their eyes, just like Brian Wilson did.
Anyhow, I thought this is a chance to get into them. Sometimes when I don't quite catch on to bands, but I see them live, all of a sudden I become a fan. So this show is happening at the Armory. I've been seeing a lot of shows there lately. There's always an incredible light show every time I've been there, and the sound is almost always great, except for a few notable exceptions that I've talked about in the past. We ended up getting to the show early, which is a huge shock because I was a half hour late meeting Chris because it was dead stop traffic. And by the time we get up to the front to see what was going on, it was one stalled car. I couldn't believe all that for one car. But we got there well before All That Remains started, and it was a great time to get there because we looked and there was nobody waiting at the merch table. So we went there right away, and I ended up getting this old school Megadeth shirt, which is actually from the Rust in Peace era. And Chris just bought a shirt that he said wouldn't scare his kids because he's got a couple of young kids, so that was kind of funny. So we get our t-shirts, we get our drinks, we stand next to the production area like we like to do, and we just checked out all the different equipment that's back there. One of the boards actually looked like it belonged in a casino, and on the monitor it said Wild Stallions, which I thought was hilarious. And I thought all us old guys are going to get the reference, but I doubt the young kids will. Who knows though? This guy walks over and he's giving me that look that people give me whenever they recognize me from the channel or whatever. And I shook his hand and introduced him to my friend Chris. And it turns out that this guy's name was Chris as well. And we talked for a long time. He knew a lot of details about my channel. And the more he talked, the more I was like, wow, this guy's like a super fan. This is great. And then he said something funny. He's like, yeah, it's funny, man. Everyone always talks about how young you are, but aren't you like 60 or something? I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not quite that old yet. So All That Remains takes the stage, and they just hit us with this insane breakdown song. It's called Now Let Them Tremble, and if you listen to it, you'll agree. It's one of those face melters. And I just couldn't get over how big they sounded right off the bat. The kick drums were just insane. They were like Fear Factory level kick drums. And they were like machine guns, just going off, like perfect timing, powerful. It sounded incredible. Now, these guys bring some of the most intense breakdowns ever. And ever since I've seen the video from Attack, all I can think of whenever I hear a great breakdown now is crabcore. And I looked down at my skinny legs. I'm like, man, I could really use some crabcore. I bet you it's really good for the thighs, It was crazy because they were just the first band of 3, and they already sounded bigger than when we saw Judas Priest there. Don't worry, I'll quit ripping on the Priest mix eventually, but it's such a stark contrast from what I was hearing. All That Remains is a very dynamic band. They could go from ultra heavy to all of a sudden just bring it all the way down and go into clean sound and play this like mystical, the ballad Iron Maiden type sound. And I love that because it reminded me a lot of the band Cynic, which is one of my favorite progressive metal bands from back in the day. If you've never heard of them, check them out. I think you're going to like them. and then they would bring the intensity back up. And I remember the drummer going into a blast beat, and I was thinking, oh, it's so cool to hear a blast beat. It's been a long time on a big stage like this. Little did I know 2 days later when I'm seeing Testament, Possessed, and Creator that I'd get my fill once again of blast beats. They had a riser in the middle of the stage where whoever was playing a lead could step up onto it. I always think that's a really good idea because it directs the audience's attention towards that person. And they were doing some really great guitar dual solos. And I thought, man, that's really cool to hear that again. You know, I grew up with Maiden, I grew up with Priest. And also, we used to play with a band called The Regime who used to do these incredible dual solos. A lot of the times they were doing sweep arpeggios. So I was kind of having flashbacks to those days. The guy in front of us was loving the band, and it was hilarious because he took out his phone and I saw him punch up Shazam, the app that could tell you what song is playing, and he holds it up and I'm like, I wonder if it's gonna work. It never worked, but I thought it was really cool that he loved the song so much he had to find out what it was called. They ended with the song 2 Weeks that I talked about earlier, and I loved it because anytime you hear a song you recognize, it just makes it that much more exciting live. And I could tell my friend was digging the song as well. So the solo was played perfectly, note for note, and that was great to see. And then Chris noticed that the sound guy, one of them, was headbanging like crazy. So I look over, and there was a guy in the middle just going crazy headbanging. Turns out he was actually in Megadeth's crew. And he came over to the All That Remains sound tech and said something, and I thought maybe he was giving him some advice on things to fix or whatever. But Chris told me that the Megadeth guy was asking the All That Remains sound tech how he was getting such a killer snare sound. So I thought that was pretty cool that no matter what level you're at, you'll still ask for advice and tips. That's the sign of a true pro in my opinion. So All That Remains gets done. They did their job. They opened the show. They got a solid 30 minutes. I did all the typical in-between set stuff, ran to the bathroom, got another drink, came back. Chris was talking to some random guy, you know, just some guy went up to him and started talking. And I really love that about metal shows is I feel like it's a family, like I always say. And you could pretty much go up to anybody and just start talking about metal. And it's just like everybody can get along. I love it. It's also interesting to me to look around and see which metal shirts everybody's wearing. I know it's not a fashion show, but it's really cool to see the diversity of bands. And I saw a lot of metal patches on jean jackets. And I thought, man, this brings me right back to junior high. Mudvayne had this killer backdrop and it didn't have their name on it, which I thought was a really cool flex. It's like, you know who we are. So they had this gigantic background with two huge skulls on it, if I remember right. And it reminded me of the pus head artwork that used to be on Metallica shirts back in the day. So I wonder if that was a pus head backdrop. I'll have to do some research, but it looked just as cool. I had this feeling like we're going to be in for this memorable show because Mudvayne's been around forever. I think they've been around since like 96. And, you know, they've been around the block, and so I had high expectations. They come out with a song called Not Falling, and it was very powerful. The music sounded huge. It was punching me in the gut. But one thing that was a little bit off in the beginning was the singer, Chad Gray. His voice was cutting through in a bad way at first. So he was doing some screaming, you know, and it was just hitting my ear a certain way that I didn't like. I was just hoping that the sound guy would even it out a little bit, and after about a song and a half, it was finally in the mix the right way. And from where we were standing, Chad Gray looked like a huge buff version of the Crow, like Brandon Lee the Crow. He had the white face going on, and he looked like he was just gigantic. There was a Mudvayne fan in front of us, and it was weird because he kept pacing back and forth while he looked down. He was wearing a hat and stuff. And he looked like a caged polar bear just going back and forth. He looked like he would either drop a sick 8-mile rap or just start lighting everybody up. So I was grateful that we all had to walk through metal detectors on our way into the venue, but I kept an eye on him, and that kept me uncomfortable the whole show. Because as Mudvayne was playing, all I could do was focus on this guy going back and forth. And then he pulls out his phone. I kind of like braced myself. He holds it up in the air, and it turns out it was a flip phone. Then I really worried about the guy. A couple guys came up to me at the Testament show, and I told them I was going to do a review on this Megadeth show. And they were like, oh, we were there too. What did you think of the Mudvayne fans? And I'm like, they seem cool to me. You know, we were far back, so I'm not really sure, but everybody seemed to be having a good time. They're like, man, we were up in front, and their fans were being dicks. They were like just pushing people around and just being obnoxious. And I'm like, all right, I'll be sure to mention that in my review. As I'm watching the show, I notice how in sync the lights are to the music. And I'm like, this is top-notch lighting happening right now, because every time the band would stop, the lights would stop. And it just seemed to be part of the music. Chris points over to the light tech, and I look over, and the guy is just going crazy. He looks like he's on stage with like Slipknot, you know, just bobbing his head and working his magic. And I looked over, I'm like, that's what a light tech should be doing. They should be like a fifth member of the band. But anyway, he was getting so into it, I got excited just from watching him. And then I looked up and I noticed how his excitement was translating through the music. You know, a lot of people think you just need good sound when it comes to concerts, but if the light show isn't matching it, it doesn't have nearly the impact that it could have. And by the way, I thought he looked like Dave Lombardo, so I thought that'd be weird if Dave Lombardo had a side gig, you know? Once the vocal problem was fixed, everything sounded gigantic. I'm talking like headliner level sound. And it was just really hitting us in a good way. It was full. I just kept thinking, you know, man, what's Megadeth going to do to top this? Over the course of the set, I was getting more and more into their music. And it wasn't until they stopped the show and Chad Gray actually did this long speech that I really got into them. When he first started going into his speech, I was a little worried that he's going to start talking about politics or something. I was just going to run to the bathroom, but he didn't. He talked about back in the day going through hell growing up, his parents being horrible to him, all his problems he had at school. And I thought, oh man, this guy is really coming from a dark place. And I really felt it when he mentioned that somebody came up to him and handed him a cassette tape, just some stranger. And it happened to be Motley Crue, Too Fast for Love. And he said that when he heard the first opening riff to Livewire, his whole life changed. And that reminded me of the first time I got Injustice for All, and that changed my life. So I felt a little bit of a connection right there with him. After he did that speech, all the songs they played after that, I felt with a little bit more depth. Like they played World So Cold. And he started doing this scream, and it sounded so painful. And I thought about that for the next 2 days. All of a sudden, I would just start thinking of that moment when he's screaming that song, and I thought of how painful that felt and sounded, and how real it seemed. They finished with the song Dig, which is great because both bands ended with a song that I knew, which is kind of generic of me that I only knew their hit song. But, you know, now that I've seen them live, I want to go like I always do and dig deeper into their catalog. And to top it off, at the end of the set, Chad actually started tearing his makeup face off. I thought it was just makeup at first, but it turns out it was some sort of rubber mask. And he just tears it off his face, and I was like, oh, that's so fitting and so badass for the end of their set. I thought about how many bands I've seen live and which bands I've seen the most, and Metallica and Megadeth are at the top of the list. And I thought, you know what though? I'm still never bored when I see them. So when Megadeth came out, I kind of knew what I was in for, but yet I was still excited, which is a good sign. But I thought they were going to have all the backlit screens like they did at the last show at Mystic Lake Casino. And that makes it tough for me because, you know, my attention gets pulled away pretty easily. So it was hard for me to focus on the band when behind them were all these visuals going on. And I thought, I really wish they would go back to just the old school traditional stage lights. Just because it's a lot easier to focus on the band members and the music when it's that way. And so I was really happy when they came out and there was no screens going on. It was just the stage lights pointing at the band for the most part, and I was very grateful for that. I recently watched a replay of the whole concert on YouTube, and I didn't remember the intro. I think I was in the bathroom just coming out, but they had this plague mask doctor walking across the stage, pushing a wheelbarrow with that background audio that says "Bring Out Your Dead." And I had to laugh because I'm like, I don't remember that part, you know, so I must have just come out of the bathroom or something. But then they kicked into their first song, The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead. And it almost seemed like the sound was already perfect. Like the sound tech had it down so well from sound check that he just pushed a button and was like, we're good. Typically, if you see a band, there's a lot of working the faders, trying to get everything rebalanced really quick, but not with Megadeth. At least at this show, it was just right away. Dave comes out playing his Explorer, which I always find kind of funny, you know, just because of his history with Hetfield, and James is known for his Explorer, obviously. So, and I was getting into it, but it wasn't until they played Wake Up Dead that I got that excited feeling. You know, like I go back to when I was a teenager and I first heard Wake Up Dead. I get that same feeling every time they kick into it live. So Dave, you know, sounded like Dave always does, and he's playing really well. Later, I would find out that he was actually sick. I did not know that. So he got through the show pretty much unscathed. I'll talk about one little thing later. And Tamo, of course, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Everybody says Timu, but he was flawless like always. Last time I saw them, he had just joined the band, and they opened with Hangar 18. What a way to start a concert when you're new to the band. And he passed with flying colors. But the one thing is I sometimes wish he would make a mistake, you know, or do something just off the cuff kind of weird. I'm not sure Dave would let him, but he's so perfect at what he plays. Sometimes you got to wonder if the guy's even human, you know? That's a compliment, by the way. That's why I'm excited if they do new music to hear what he does with his own solos, because I know how incredible of a musician he is. James on bass was solid like always. You know, he's born to be on stage playing this kind of music. You know, he's just such a natural when it comes to that. And then one of the best additions to the band, I swear, Dave is one of the best recruiters for bands. Dirk on drums is what I call him. He's just such a natural back there when he plays. He looks like he's been in the band for 100 years. You know, he's just so laid back. He's playing some of the most difficult drum patterns. Trust me, I tried to learn the thread is real one time on drums, and I watched him play it from like a drummer's camp, and he looks like he's just having a great time. Like he could be reading a book while he's playing. It makes it just look so easy, you know? And it took me, I think, 2 days to finally get the beat down. Some of my favorite songs that they played live is, of course, Hangar 18, but they also kicked into Angry Again, which is still one of my favorite Megadeth songs of all time. They played Trust, Tornado of Souls, of course, you have to play that one, and also Mechanics, which is great to hear live. And for some reason, I wish Dave would just do this one time for fun. I wished in the middle of the song he would wedge in the Sweet Home Alabama part, as he calls it, from the Four Horsemen. Just as like a little bit of a dig on Metallica. I think that would be hilarious. Once again, I was bummed that they didn't play my favorite Megadeth song, which is In My Darkest Hour. But, you know, of course, it's always great to hear Peace Sells live. But in this particular concert, I was excited to hear it because I had just gotten done doing my bad tab video, where I recreated what the tab said to do for that descending part. It's not pretty. Check this out. When they got done, I had a feeling they were going to come back out for an encore. You can always tell because they keep the lights low. And they come out and they play, what did they play? Symphony of Destruction. And the thing I remember is Dave messed up. And it's so rare for anyone in the band to make a mistake. I think Dave runs a very tight ship, almost like Prince, I think. I don't think he's like fining people when they make a mistake, but who knows. Anyway, Dave kind of messed up on what part the song was at. Check this out. And being the pro that he is, he just easily morphed into the next part like nothing happened. I love that. I was a little bit worried that they were going to throw in like a brand new song for the final tune. And I have nothing against new Megadeth, but I'm really slow at adopting new songs from bands I love. But they ended up playing Holy Wars. And I thought that was funny because I completely forgot about Holy Wars. They have so many awesome tunes that when they kicked into it, I'm like, oh, duh. Once again, talking about my bad tab video, I spent a whole day trying to play that clean acoustic part, you know, the Marty Friedman middle break section of Holy Wars. I practiced it so much my fingers were burning. But then to see Tamo play it with such ease, you know, almost like Dirk on drums, it's just so laid back when he plays it. I'm just like, that is a natural for you. The band got done, they were throwing picks out, you know, and that's when I wish I would have been up front. It would have been really cool to catch a Megadeth pick to add to my pick collection that I'm starting. We're in the elevator going down, and there was a guy that kind of looked like Jim Brewer, and he was kind of bummed out looking. He's like, man, I can't believe they didn't play Symphony of Destruction. And we're all like, yeah, they did. And I wondered if maybe he had like that Taylor Swift effect, you know, where after a Taylor Swift concert, people have this weird amnesia. I thought maybe this guy had the same thing going on, or he had too much to drink. It wasn't until later that night that I learned that it was the 34th anniversary of Rust in Peace, which I find odd because Dave never mentioned it from what I can remember. Maybe I had that amnesia too. I could still remember watching Headbangers Ball when it first came out, and they announced that they were releasing this album. And the VJ asked Dave, like, what's the name of the album? And Dave's like, oh, it's called Rest in Peace, and it's coming out next week. And I thought he called it Rest in Peace. And I'm like, that's generic as hell. And so I was happy to find out it was Rust in Peace, and it quickly became one of my favorite Megadeth albums, if not my favorite. I have to think about it. Yeah, it is. When we got to the venue, I told my friend that I wasn't going to do a review this time. I was just going to enjoy the show, put my phone away, and just, hang out. But so many funny and cool things happened, plus with brand new opening bands and the fact that Megadeth always seems to find a way to surprise me, I thought it would be worth doing this review, and hopefully you agree as well. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for watching. I will be doing a review for the Testament show as well. You won't believe all the stuff that happened there, so it's been quite the exciting week. All right, everybody, we'll catch you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.